And by way of a conclusion, it's one of my favorite quotes. It's by Andy Warhol. He says, Andy Warhol says, "I don't know the secret of success, but I know the secret of failure, and it's to try to please everybody." And so the key message from yesterday for me is now is the time for Europe to decide as to whether Europe 2020 will be a remake of the I-2010, or whether it will turn into an agenda that will produce a smart, sustainable and inclusive growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Mr. Mike Byrne. The workshop was about ensuring quality television and broadband throughout the European Union. So the question might be, what is quality television? How would you define that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My role, similar to that of Philippe's, is to, and my role and my privilege actually, is to summarise as best I can the interactions and the debate that took place at the second workshop. We were indeed very fortunate to have our workshop chaired by Mrs. Trautmann, and I believe the interactions that took place from all of the stakeholders and from the parliamentarians and from the general floor fully reflected the seriousness of the subject matter which was presented to us. Our debate focused on the digital dividend, and as the chairman said, ensuring quality television and broadband. I stress that throughout the European Union. My apologies. Thank you. I suppose that in our discussion topics we were focusing on 4 key areas. The discussion reflected on the decisions that need to be taken in the short term and on the medium term. And that was something that many of the stakeholders came back to, and there were many interventions in relation to this key area. We also reflected on the social and cultural aspects that the digital dividend can provide, and also on the role of spectrum management and the respective media politics in delivering cultural diversity. Now, this was a theme that was like a thread through all of the various conversations yesterday. And again, if I may say, it was picked up this morning again by Commissioner Kroes. And if I could paraphrase what she said this morning, because it reflects on the debate from yesterday as well, spectrum management is a complex issue, but regulators should not hide behind that complexity. It's far too important a resource for consumers and for the citizens of the EU not to use that resource to provide the services that they need. And that was, again, that was a theme that came through from a number of the different interventions yesterday. The third area that we reflected on was how can Europe ensure that broadband becomes available to everyone, including in rural and remote areas, and what is the role of radio spectrum in achieving this. It was quite interesting that one of the parliamentarians yesterday highlighted the fact that it's not just citizens and consumers in rural areas that are impacted by the digital divide, but it can also be consumers in vulnerable consumers in industrialised areas. And again, this is something that one needs to reflect on when examining a policy programme for the use of the digital dividend in the coming years. The fourth area was that how can Europe best deliver the quality and choice of television transmission in the long term, and what is the impact of this on spectrum use. Again, a key theme that came through from a number of different stakeholders, some of them using the same point to argue from different places, if you follow my argument, was that radio spectrum is the electromagnetic lifeblood of the digital economy, and particularly of the future digital economy. And there were some very, very good and compelling arguments made by various different stakeholders to say, well, why radio spectrum is more important to them than it is perhaps to other users of that radio spectrum. Again, one of the key themes, though, that came back from other stakeholders and from other interventions is that The ownership of radio spectrum is not enshrined with one particular user community, but is there to benefit all of the citizens and consumers of the EU. And finally, the discussion points reflected on how best radio spectrum policy can address these objectives. And I suppose that's the key task of what the Spectrum Summit is actually about. As I said, we were very, very lucky and privileged to have input from 6 European parliamentarians from a full range of stakeholders representing both the vertical and horizontal value chain that radio spectrum uses. I have over 20 pages of notes, but I don't propose to bring you through them line by line. If I may, I might give you my attempt at summarising the key points, and I hope I do justice to all of the speakers in doing so. The first point, if I may say, is that radio spectrum is clearly identified as being a core input in building a digital EU. It has been important historically. There's no doubt about that, and there have been some successes, some of which were mentioned yesterday, particularly in relation to the GSM framework. But it is arguably much more important going forward in terms of the fundamental core building block of building a digital EU. And this was a point actually that was made very well at last night's dinner as well with Commissioner Cruz, the importance of this issue. The second area is the need to ensure the most efficient and effective use of what is a scarce, valuable resource. As one of the parliamentarians said yesterday, radio spectrum is actually a little treasure. It's a treasure, it has a value, and should be used creatively and responsibly. The digital dividend offers a great opportunity to realise economic and social benefits for the EU. But there is a need to ensure a reasonable level of harmonisation in order to reap the full benefits. Now, this was a particularly important point, that yes, people do understand and appreciate, stakeholders, when I say people, stakeholders do understand and appreciate the importance of a coordinated, harmonised approach to the use of what is a valuable resource. However, it also came across from a number of the stakeholders that perhaps we are starting from different places, and that different member states have different needs and objectives to fulfil in terms of how it deals with the issues that they are facing. So while on the one hand, yes, it is important to reflect on the need for a harmonised and coordinated approach, we must also ground that ambition, and I'm going to talk about ambition in a second, in realism. And that's the realism that member states are operating at different speeds somewhat in terms of how it is applying its policy to the digital dividend. The one final point is the need to balance for all players, broadcasters, mobile network operators,